Should we be concerned about the reliability of the Gospels? Do Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, in fact, contradict each other? This is a very serious accusation, which has led to this new groundbreaking book, Jesus Contradicted. And the author, Professor Mike Licona, is here with us today. Mike, my brother, how we doing?
Hey, great. Good to be back with you, Raj. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, Mike, on this show, for example, if you are a believer, we are going to go to some uncomfortable places, but that's why we created this show, to be able to give you confidence that when you overturn things, there are good answers. I mean, that's why we talk about archaeology all the time. We're not afraid of archaeology. In fact, we're excited about it because we have confidence knowing that, God's story will be confirmed, but you have to allow yourself to go to some uncomfortable places, ask the hard questions. So that's why, again, we created this channel. So please subscribe because we want to give you confidence that, yes, you can trust the Bible. But let's start with some hard truth, my friend. Are there differences, discrepancies, contradictions in the Gospels?
Yes, it's pretty clear that there are now. They are surface discrepancies. And even Origen, at the beginning of the 3rd century, he acknowledged that there were surface discrepancies. That is, just surface minor details, but the message was the same throughout them. And so he didn't have problems with it. So let me just give you an example. In Mark, you have Matthew, Mark, and Luke, but let's just focus on Matthew and Mark here, where Jesus commissions his disciples and he sends them out. And in Mark's gospel, he says, don't take this, or this, but you can take staff and you can take sandals. When Matthew tells it the same story, he sends them out and says, don't take this, or this, and don't take staff and don't take sandals. So that is a surface contradiction, a surface discrepancy. Now, what's going on here? Well, most even evangelical New Testament scholars agree that Matthew and Luke are using Mark as their primary source, and they supplement Mark, but they also edit him. So why would Matthew edit Mark by changing the words of Jesus to say, don't take sandals and don't take a staff? We can only guess because we can't get into the mind of Matthew at this point. But I think that what's probably happening here is Matthew is just changing this to make the point a little clearer. And the point is this: his disciples are to trust God for everything. And by changing to say, don't take anything with you, it makes that point a little clearer. So if you were there, and video recorded this, it'd probably be more like what Mark reports, but Matthew presents it in a clearer manner.
So this is, I think, a really hard pill for people to swallow, hearing that there are contradictions in the Gospels. And I want to ask you why you wrote this book, but I want to read just a couple sentences. That's something that you wrote. And I think this is really poignant for our discussion. And it goes to the idea of New Testament scholarship that's, like, for example, Bart Ehrman, who's really driving home this fact as kind of one of the main reasons that you shouldn't trust the New Testament, you shouldn't trust the Gospels. And here's what you said: for some of you, what you are about to read will immediately turn on a welcome light that illuminates the Gospels for you as never before. For others, reading this book will be like a roller coaster ride. It will be scary at times and make you uncomfortable, because this book will challenge the way you previously view the Gospels and the Bible. You may even get the impression that the foundation of your faith is being shaken, when in reality, and here it is your view of Scripture that is being challenged. So, Mike, why did you write this book?
Well, I saw over the years, I'd met many believers who were really, really struggling with their faith, some of which had left their faith because they saw these surface discrepancies in the Gospels, and they had been brought up in a very stilted or wooden view of Scripture that says, if there's one error in it, you can't believe any of it. And it's like, where do you get that from? Do we apply that to any other piece of literature? Well, of course not. And then it's like, yeah, but this is supposed to be God's divinely inspired word. Yes, it is. But what does it mean to say it is God's divinely inspired word? How did inspiration take place? Scripture does not inform us. So if we don't know how inspiration took place or what it is exactly, then it's difficult to come with a firm view that says this is what Scripture must be. It could not have any kind of errors in it. Now, I'm happy to unpack that, and I'm not saying the Bible has errors in it. I'm saying that we have to be open to the possibility that it does, and if it does, it's really no big deal if it's in surface discrepancies.
Mm.
I mean, after all, Christianity, if Jesus rose from the dead, Christianity was true, and he rose from the dead, at least 15 years, if not much longer, before the first piece of of New Testament literature was written. So any kind of errors in the New Testament literature wouldn't negate the truth of Christianity, since Christianity was true for at least a decade and a half before any of it was written.
Well, I think for, this channel is called Can I Trust the Bible? And people, if they want to throw a word like inerrancy, and my view of scripture is the highest possible elevated level that it can be. But what I would say, and this is my opinion. I would say that everything in scripture is there because God wanted it to be like it is. And one of the things that you pointed out in this book, or I can't remember if it was an interview about this book, but this is, I think, really helpful. So if you're watching this and you want help with your faith, I think this and understanding and appreciating the Bible, I think this is a perfect example. If you read Mark chapter 1, verse 5, hear me. It says, the whole Judean countryside and all the people of Jerusalem went out to him, confessing their sins. They were baptized by him in the Jordan River. Now, do you believe that's true? Of course I believe that's true. Do you believe that's true? Of course you do. But do you really believe it literally? The whole Judean countryside and all the people of Jerusalem. Do you really think that meant every single individual, man, woman, and child in all of Judea, and every single person evacuated Jerusalem and went out to see John the Baptist? Well, of course not. You know that what John is doing here is using hyperbole to tell a truth. And I think that is an important thing. Does that make the Bible wrong, or is that an error? Absolutely not. It is a different version, and you talk about this a lot, a different genre. The Psalms are poetry, so if you take them hyper literally, you're going to have problems. But are the Psalms true? Yes, but you have to have the right genre. So this whole idea sent you on, I think you've been studying this for what, and it was like 8 years prior to writing this book, something like that.
Well, 8 years for the first book and on the topic, and then an additional 3 years for this one. So 11 years.
Over a decade of your life studying this idea. So help us out, man. Like we people want to know, can they trust the Bible? They're on this show, but they have this book, Jesus Contradicted. So what did you find in those 11 years?
Well, certainly there's, what we see going on are the authors of the Gospels are using compositional devices, which were part and parcel of writing ancient historical literature. In fact, we use many of them even today in our everyday, ordinary conversations. So, for example, take the empty tomb narrative. Matthew and Mark report one angel being at the tomb, whereas Luke and John report two angels being there. Well, I think what's going on here is a very common compositional device that we could call literary spotlighting. So just imagine yourself, you're at a theatrical performance, and all of a sudden the lights go out and a spotlight shines on one of the actors on the stage who breaks out in a monologue. Well, you know that other actors are up on that stage, but you can't see them because the focus is on just one of them at that time. Well, literary spotlighting is when an author knows that several people are present, but the focus is only on one of those individuals. So Plutarch, who's the greatest of all ancient biographers, he does this probably more than any other compositional device that I was able to see within his writings. And I think this is what's going on in the resurrection narratives. What you have here is Matthew and Mark are focusing on the angel who is announcing that Jesus has been raised from the dead, and that's why the tomb is empty. Neither of them say there was only one angel at the tomb, but they're only mentioning the
Mm.
one who's doing the speaking. You also find it later on when the women go to the tomb. So John only reports Mary Magdalene going, whereas the other gospels report multiple women going. Well, how many women actually went? Well, John doesn't say that it was only Mary Magdalene, but he's only mentioning her. Why? Well, maybe she's his source for the story. She's the prominent figure between the Marys who went. That could be another reason. John does seem to know that there were other women, because when Mary comes and reports what they saw at the empty, or they saw that the tomb was empty, she says, they have taken the Lord and we don't know where they've laid
Mm.
him. And then you've got the Emmaus disciples. Jesus appears to them and he's kind of playing with them. He says, why the long faces, guys? And he says, well, are you the only one in Jerusalem who doesn't know what's taken place over the last couple of days? And Jesus says, no, what? Must have been funny playing with that. And it says their eyes were kept from recognizing Jesus. So they tell him the story that Jesus, they thought he was the Messiah and he was crucified on Friday. And then it says, they say to him, some of our own went to the tomb and found it as the women had said. That's in Luke 24:24. But in 24:12, just 12 verses earlier, Luke reports that Peter got up and went to the tomb and found it as the women said. Well, was it
Interesting.
just Peter, or was it some of our own, multiple people? Well, it was probably multiple, but he's only mentioning Peter because either Peter is his source for the story, or Peter's the main disciple who goes there. He's the leader of the disciples, so he's shining his spotlight. So here in the resurrection narratives, you probably have three instances of literary spotlighting.
Mm.
And so, whereas you have people like Ehrman and others who will make a big to-do out of this, I mean, this is the kind of stuff we do in our everyday, ordinary
Right.
conversations. It's no big deal. It's not a contradiction. It's a compositional device.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that I find really interesting about the Gospels is the fact that they're all not perfectly aligned actually gives credence to the idea that these are individual stories. I know, the apologist, our friend J. Warner Wallace, that actually helped him as a forensic detective. That this is, if you were making this up, they would all say exactly the same thing, exactly the same way. But the fact that they have different versions of the same story, but version doesn't mean different accounts. It means that, like, for example, if a huge wrecking ball came in and just wrecked this house right now, and my 5-year-old was in the other room, he would be like, have like a much more theatrical Marvel movie thing that he would be reporting that happened, and I'd be like, well, actually, there was this guy from a construction site who misplaced one of the. And it would be the same story told differently. I think that's what's so helpful about your book and this groundbreaking research that you've done is you've looked at, as you've mentioned, Plutarch, which is a funny name, but for those of you who don't know, Plutarch, as you mentioned, Mike, is arguably, maybe not even arguably, the most well-known biographer during the time of Jesus. He wrote biographies on Caesar, on Mark Antony, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Brutus. And so what you did was you looked at how he wrote biographies about the same stories in a lot of ways, and how, if it's the same author, they should be identical, but they're not. So what did you learn from examining Plutarch about the kind of genre of biography at the time that the Gospels were written?
Well, Plutarch is regarded as the greatest ancient biographer, and a lot of what we know about the past comes from Plutarch. And he wrote more than 60 biographies, excuse me, of which 48 have survived. And a lot of times he's writing about events of which several prominent figures participated. So, for example, he reports or mentions the assassination of Julius Caesar in 4 of his biographies. Now, back then they were called lives, like the life of Caesar, the life of Cicero, etc. So Plutarch mentions the assassination of Caesar in his life of Cicero, life of Caesar, life of Antony, and life of Brutus. So what you can do is you've got the same author writing around the same time. In fact, some of those, Brutus, Caesar, and Antony, were written simultaneously. Cicero was written a little before then. So and he only mentions that Caesar was assassinated. The other three actually give details. So when you're looking at the biographies of Caesar, Antony, and Brutus, and you compare them, three biographies that are all written at the same time, simultaneously by Plutarch, and so he's using the same sources, writing about the same event. You look and you say, is he copying and pasting? No, Plutarch never copies and pastes, I found, because I looked at this for 36 different stories in Plutarch's lives that are reported in two or more of those biographies. He never copies and pastes. He always will vary it a little bit, paraphrasing and things like this. So by looking at how he tells the story differently with different details in his various biographies reporting the same event, you start to see a pattern of how he changes things a little bit. And you see literary spotlighting, you see compression, you see conflation, you see transferal and displacement and things like this. You see these things on a regular basis. And so these patterns, plus you see him changing statements to questions and questions to command. You see him expanding things, amplifying things. You see a lot of these things and others than what I've just mentioned. Now, you read classicists like the foremost authority in the world on Plutarch. His name's Christopher Pelling. He retired from Oxford, teaching at Oxford as in Greek and classics just a few years ago. Foremost authority in the world on Plutarch, and he says, these things are common, not only in Plutarch, but in all ancient literature. And you find others who say the same thing, other classicists. So now you think, well, if this is common, and if Theon, who wrote in the first century, says that, he mentions a bunch of the things that I just mentioned, he says, these are used in every form of writing. Okay. And he says historians not only paraphrase their own writings, but also the writings of others. So if this is the case, and Plutarch is paraphrasing his writings, and you find others paraphrasing the writings of others, and you say, all right, well, wouldn't we expect the gospel authors to do this if this is part of the literary conventions of that day? Yeah, in fact, we should be surprised that they did not. So then what I did was I made a list. I read through the Gospels 8 or 9 times in Greek, and I made a list. I cataloged all the differences that I found. And it's like, okay, now you go back and you read those stories in view of these compositional devices, and hark, it's like in almost every case, you can come to an understanding of why those things exist, or at least a plausible explanation of why they exist.
Wow.
Now, that's not to say that in every case they used a compositional device.
Right.
It could be the case, like Jim Warner says, and I love Jim, he's a great guy, that when you see differences, it shows independent reports. I think that applies sometimes in the Gospels. Like, perfect example would be Jesus' time before Pilate. You see this reported by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Definitely seems like you have 4 independent accounts.
Right.
But in other instances where you have Matthew and Luke very similar to Mark, a lot of verbal similarities, well, it's probably indicative that they're using Mark as their primary source and editing him. They are changing him just like Plutarch would change his own writings and that of his sources.
Well, Mike, you are a personal dear friend of mine, and you're hilarious and you're fun to be around. But if you're watching this, I want you to know how blessed you are, how blessed we are to have Professor Licona on this show. He is arguably the world's leading academic scholar on the resurrection of Jesus on planet Earth, and also when it comes to quote unquote the contradictions in the gospel. So we are blessed and thankful for you and your work. And I want you to know that sometimes when you're, in your studies and you feel like, is anyone paying attention? The answer is yes, Mike. And we are so, so, so grateful that you've done this hard work, because now we get to reap the benefits of it, and we can, yes, trust the Bible. But, I think the thumbnail is, I'm concerned. Now, this is a concerning issue, but here's the question, Mike. Now that you have done 11 years worth of work to reach to this book, are you concerned about the contradictions in the Gospels?
Well, first, let me clarify something. I'd say Gary Habermas is the foremost authority in the world on the
Well, I
resurrection.
put you up there. It's like LeBron and Kobe, this one or that one.
Um, but no, I'm not concerned. I'm more like Origin there, where, yeah, there are surface discrepancies. I think we can understand why virtually all of them are present. They don't change anything in terms of the gist of what's going on. Still think in every case, we have an essentially faithful representation of what occurred. Um, and I don't even think that these actually challenge the doctrine of inerrancy any more than Mark 1:5 that you cited at the very beginning of this interview, where Mark changes the actual facts of history. The actual facts of history would have been that many people were going out to see John the Baptist, and a lot of them were being baptized by him. And then Mark uses hyperbole by saying the entire region of Judea and every Jerusalemite went out to John the Baptist and were baptized by him. He's using hyperbole. That changes the facts of history, you could say, but we understand what he's doing and it doesn't bother us. And if the Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are using the compositional devices that were part and parcel of writing ancient biography back then that doesn't change anything in terms of inerrancy or inspiration. That's just writing according to the literary conventions of their day. And if we adjust, it's like looking through a camera. If you adjust your focus
Yep.
to look at the literary conventions in play in the first century, then a lot more comes into focus.
Yep. Well, Mike, I cannot recommend this book enough. Jesus Contradicted. I love you to death. I love your wife. You guys are incredible. Let me ask you this one last question. This show is called Can I Trust the Bible? And you've gone to some dark places. Did Jesus actually rise from the dead? Are there errors in the Bible? You've done the work for us. But I know for a fact that there are people who are watching this show that are struggling with doubt. That maybe they've heard some of the accusations that Bart Ehrman has said that, well, all the contradictions in the Bible makes it so that you can't trust the Bible, or maybe Jesus didn't rise from the dead, or all these other things that are kind of shot at people, especially on college campuses and whatnot. You take this however you want it. What if my friend here is struggling with doubt and questioning their faith? What encouragement would you give my friend here?
I'd say if Jesus rose from the dead, it's game, set, match. Christianity is true, period. And, no matter how you answer things such as how to interpret the Genesis account of creation, how you address the matter of genocide text in the Old Testament, how you address interpreting the flood, was it global or regional or whatever, how you address differences in the Gospels, all this kind of stuff. No matter how you address those, if Jesus rose from the dead, Christianity is true, period. I would say the matter of gospel differences and what we've been discussing here, I think it takes away the major objection against the reliability of the Gospels. Does that mean the Gospels are reliable? No, but it takes away the major objection to it. For the reliability of the Gospels and building a positive case, well, I've got a positive case for it, but that's a different matter. I do have a lecture that I have on my YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube and type in my name, Mike Licona. Our channel will come up. We have right around 700 videos. And then go under the playlists and look for, I forgot what it is, contemporary issues and New Testament studies. And there's something on the historical reliability of the Gospels. Or you can go to my website, risenjesus.com. I've got an article that was published in Religions, a critical journal, and where I compare, I build a positive case. I say, here's what we mean by historically reliable. Here are criteria that we would apply not only to the Gospels, but any piece of ancient literature before we call it reliable. And then I take the Gospel of Mark and subject it to those criteria and compare that with Suetonius's Life of Augustus to see how it works with that. Now, Suetonius is considered to be the ancient biographer that wrote more like we write biography today, and his Life of Augustus is considered to be his best biography. So you compare that with Mark, and they're both about the same. So, according to these criteria, they fulfill the criteria equally well. So, that's a positive case for the reliability of the Gospels. I think the Gospels are historically reliable.
Let's go. Well, Mike, I love how you casually slipped in there earlier. And I read the New Testament 8 times in Greek. I'm like, wait. First off, you could understand ancient Greek. Secondly, you read it 8 times. You are a gift to us all. The book is Jesus Contradicted. My friend, Professor Mike Licona, love you so much. Thanks for coming on, my friend.